All right, guys, so let's walk through lab safety. Basically, for lab safety, there's some key things you have to know. And if you've gone over your safety contract, then you know there are things like that. We're always careful whenever handling things that can be explosive. We're always very careful whenever handling things that are chemicals that could be corrosive, meaning they could harm our skin or something of that nature. Some basic lab equipment that you need to know. If I'm getting ready to do lab, then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on an apron. That's going to protect my clothes. And if you're one of my girls that's like tiny, if you'll fold those over, it'll shrink some of the bottom off of it so that you don't have to worry about that as much. So we tie on an apron. That apron's going to protect our clothing. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put on safety goggles. And remember, I told you there are multiple varieties back there. Whichever one works for you, it's great. Now, these are easier if you have glasses. And for me, I just like these more. But that's up to you. So we're going to put on safety goggles. Okay, now the next piece would depend on the type of lab I'm doing. If I'm not doing a lab that requires any form of flame, then I can put on gloves if I need gloves. Now, a lot of times we don't need gloves, so we're not going to waste them. But if I need gloves, then gloves are available. So to do lab, I've pulled my hair back because I don't want my hair in the way. I've pushed up my sleeves because I don't want my sleeves to catch fire or to get hung on things. I've put on safety goggles, I've put on gloves, and I have on an apron. Basic safety concepts. I'm not going to have anything to drink in lab. I'm also not going to have anything to eat in lab because both of those are not acceptable. Now, something that people sometimes mess up on is they want to be able to have lab and chew gum. No gum during lab because then you don't know if something gets in your mouth that isn't supposed to be there. And all jokes aside, I have had children during lab who have had gum in their mouths and accidentally ingested pig parts. So no gum during lab. So no food, no drink in lab. I have on protection and I'm ready to go. Hair's pulled back, no dangly earrings, nothing like that during lab, and that should have me pretty much covered on that part. So now for the next thing, some basic equipment that I want to know. In this classroom, sort of like when you bake at home, you might have two different forms of measurement. Now, if I were doing small amounts, this is a pipette, and it measures 1 milliliter. So I would use this to transfer liquids from one location to another, or to measure out 1 milliliter, and it's got these lines on it so I can see 1 milliliter of liquid. Now, if I needed to do more than 1 milliliter, so this would be like the equivalent of using a teaspoon, okay? If I needed more than that, I might use this. This allows me to go up to 25 milliliters. Liters are liquid. So I would use this if I need to measure up to 25. And then if I had to measure more than that, I would start thinking in terms of beakers. Now this beaker does 250. Now the reason I use these three different methods would be that this is kind of a not precise, but still sends out a pretty consistent amount of liquid. So I would use this sort of like a literal teaspoon, like when you get a spoon out of your cabinet and you're going to move over a little sugar into tea. That would be like this. So it's not necessarily precise, but it's still pretty consistent. If I need to be precise, I'm going to use a graduated cylinder. And this graduated cylinder would be like your measuring spoons. Tablespoon, teaspoon, a fourth of a teaspoon, that kind of thing is where I would use this. And then if I were going to do like half a cup, a whole cup, it would be like a beaker. So this pipette, not incredibly precise, however, is consistent. This graduated cylinder would be precise for small amounts, And if I'm going to do larger amounts, I would use a beaker. And as you remember from physical science, the beaker is something that goes much larger. This is the size we use in here most of the time. All right. Sometimes we use micro wells. This is like a little version of a test tube. So I have these guys, my big test tubes, and I have these guys, my little micro well. Now this micro well would be used if I want to look at different experiments or look at different reactions using a small amount of substance. So that's what this is for. You're going to spend more time with just regular standard test tubes. This is a standard test tube. It is glass. They are breakable. If you break one, we don't freak out. You don't like hide it somewhere. You just simply say, hey, I broke a test tube. I will come over. I'll take care of it for you. The way we hold a test tube, a test tube holder. Ta-da! I can now hold the test tube. Later this semester, you're going to do an activity where you have to have boiling water. It's going to be in a beaker. You're going to come up. You're going to put it into the boiling water. You're going to leave it there for a few seconds. Notice that I don't have that pointed toward me. And I also don't have a stopper in this because you should never heat closed containers. So when I see my color change, I will pick this up and I will take it back to my table to a test tube rack. That test tube rack is the blue thing. Test tube rack. Test tube holder. Test tube rack. I'm going to put it into my test tube rack and let it cool down. Then I would continue with my experiment. So for this section, the things I need to know would be small amounts of substance, like small amounts of liquids, to test reactions. I would use a micro well. I have a set of test tubes. I would use those for larger experiments. And those test tubes have a test tube holder and a test tube rack. My test tube holder is this piece. It holds an individual test tube. My test tube rack is the blue thing. Okay, so micro well, test tube holder, test tube rack. All right, funnel, easy, just like any other use for a funnel. If we need to put stuff into, say here, I would use it there for the graduated cylinder. I then rinse it out. I put it back up onto the walls. The walls have like little drying panels, and that's where you would put those. Let's see. That's basic lab safety. Now as far as around the room lab safety and where things are located. Back room doesn't really have anything we need. There are sinks. At each of those sinks you should find cleaner and you should find soap. There are towels. Those towels are located over on the right hand side, and it's going to be white towels. They're in 2 drawers and they say white towels. That's where you'll pick up white towels for lab. You also have the aprons back there, you have the goggles back there, and you have the gloves back there. That should take care of that section for us. The fire extinguisher is located right outside in the hall on the wall. The fire blanket, which we would use to contain a small fire in the classroom, is located in Miss Pippin's room. We don't really use fire very often, so it's put to better use next door. If something were to get on you, you are to wash your hands, you are to wash whatever clothing. If it's on your face, if it's in your eyes, we have an eye wash station to the back of the room. There's also a shower. Now, I showed it to you earlier, so we know what that is, and hopefully we will never need it. If ever you're worried about having something on your body, as in on your hands, on your clothing, on your face, in your hair, you let me know. First rule of thumb is you tell your partner, and then you immediately let me know. I don't care how small it is, let me know. All right, glassware. If glassware gets broken, back where the shower is, there's a red box that is has a biohazard label on it, and it's a sharp objects box. So if we have scalpel blades, or if one of these test tubes happens to break, or a beaker happens to break, then that's where those things go. And once a year, I empty that. Anything that we use for lab goes back up into the red trash can to be disposed of. Also, if we do a lab, and you get your stuff, and then you go, oh no, I have extra of this. We don't put it back. That would be like going to the Golden Corral and getting a plate full of food, and then you're like, well, you know, I just this chicken leg. I think I'm gonna put it back up on the bar. No one wants your used chicken leg. No one wants your used lab material. If it's something that is a consumable, like a liquid or a powder that can contaminate, then we do not put it back in. If it's something like you used a pair of scissors, no problem. Or a glue stick or something like that, no issue. But if it's an actual chemical, they do not get put back into rotation because they might be contaminated without your knowledge, ruining every experiment that happens after that. I think that's pretty much it. If we have a tornado, we go outside into the hall, away from the outside windows and away from the glass from here. If we have a fire, we go out and we stand at the end of the pavement. I think that pretty much covers it. So what you're going to do now for me is you're going to take a lab test.